What if a single discovery could shake the foundations of everything we think we know? What if something buried deep in the Amazon challenges the timeline of civilization itself? And what does it mean when scientists admit that this find doesn't excite them at first? It terrifies them. These questions aren't designed for drama. They arise because new LIDAR scans, taken only weeks ago and reported across several research outlets, reveal vast geometric formations beneath the rainforest canopy. The data show shapes that are too straight, too consistent, and too deliberate to be natural. They resemble platforms, corridors, and massive earthworks arranged with mathematical precision. Why does this matter? Because for decades, the academic consensus claimed that the Amazon could never support large, urban societies. The soil was too poor, the environment too harsh. Yet the new structures contradict these assumptions in a way that feels almost uncomfortable. They hint at engineering knowledge and organizational skill that shouldn't be there, not according to our old models. The strange part is the scale. Some of the formations are larger than known ceremonial centers from well-documented ancient cultures. Others follow a grid pattern that suggests urban planning on a level previously unseen in this region. And the deeper scans go, the more layers appear, as if the forest has been hiding not one settlement, but an entire network. So the question returns, sharper than Zuver. Are we looking at the remains of a forgotten civilization that thrived where no civilization was supposed to exist? Or are these formations simply misunderstood geological patterns waiting for a more mundane explanation? Whatever the truth is, it seems clear that these shapes are not anomalies. They are signals, fragments of something much larger, buried in silence beneath the trees. In the coming moments, the outlines of this mystery will widen, not through bold conclusions, but through the quiet accumulation of clues. The patterns revealed by the scans point toward a system that appears far more intentional than previously imagined, and each new data point raises the possibility that these structures belong to a cultural landscape we have never fully considered. As more layers of the forest floor are digitally peeled back, hints emerge of roads stretching across great distances, earthen platforms arranged in repeating ratios, and voids that might once have been reservoirs or plazas. These features suggest a level of coordination that demands closer scrutiny, yet they remain only glimpses for now. There are questions about who these people might have been, how they shaped their environment, and why so many of their traces disappeared beneath the soil. There is also the unsettling implication that this discovery could tie into older regional legends about vanished societies, stories that were long dismissed as myth but may now deserve a fresh, analytical reading. The deeper investigation will move through the mechanisms behind these formations, the evidence that supports or contradicts current interpretations, and the competing explanations that attempt to frame the data without exaggeration. It will also confront the gaps that remain, the unanswered questions that keep this topic suspended between revelation and uncertainty. What else lies hidden beneath those trees? And how far do the boundaries of this forgotten world extend? At first glance, the newly revealed formations might seem like random patches of raised earth, the kind anyone might overlook during a routine survey. But a more familiar comparison helps clarify their structure. Imagine standing above a modern city at night. Even when the lights blur into distance, the grid of streets still betrays intention. Patterns like that do not occur by accident. In archaeological terms, the Amazonian formations follow what researchers describe as orthogonal alignment, a layout in which structures are positioned at consistent right angles. This is not a natural process. It is a form of spatial engineering in which each segment relates mathematically to the next, much like the modular planning of early urban centers around the world. The presence of such alignment implies long-term coordination rather than ad hoc settlement. Another mechanism at play involves the soil itself. Beneath parts of the rainforest lies a man-made substrate known as terra preta, a nutrient-rich dark soil created by controlled burning, organic waste layering, and charcoal infusion. This process increases fertility over centuries and was likely used to support dense populations. If the newly detected structures cluster around terra preta zones, it could indicate an engineered agricultural system rather than isolated habitation. There is also the question of drainage and water manipulation. Some of the anomalies detected by LIDAR resemble channels, berms, and reservoirs. These elements suggest hydrological management similar to that found in ancient Southeast Asian and Mesoamerican societies. If such systems exist here, they imply knowledge of seasonal cycles and long-term environmental planning. Could natural erosion mimic such shapes? Scientists have debated this point, with some arguing that certain rectangular depressions might result from differential weathering or root collapse. Yet these explanations tend to break down when confronted with repeated symmetry across wide distances. Nature produces patterns, but rarely produces them with such mathematical consistency. Discussions around these mechanisms often spark intense debate in comment sections on scientific websites and research forums. Some viewers propose that the formations belong to known pre-Columbian groups, while others argue for an entirely separate, undocumented culture. A smaller camp suggests geological explanations, while a more adventurous minority speculates about catastrophic events or sudden cultural disappearance. These disagreements reflect both the complexity of the evidence and the limitations of what we currently understand. Every hypothesis points toward a different interpretation of the same unusual geometry, and each interpretation carries implications that extend far beyond a single site. Several concrete observations stand out from the recent scans, each offering a fragment of clarity without yet revealing the full picture. The first is the presence of vast rectangular platforms, some stretching hundreds of meters in length. Their edges are unervingly straight, with angles that remain consistent even when traced across uneven terrain. Such precision suggests deliberate leveling and long-term construction rather than opportunistic settlement on naturally flat ground. Another notable feature is a network of linear pathways extending far beyond the immediate clusters of earthworks. These pathways maintain a near-constant width and orientation, cutting through dense vegetation in geometric lines that natural processes rarely produce. Researchers comparing these routes to ancient roads in Peru and Mexico note that the proportions appear engineered, perhaps for movement, trade, or ritual procession. A third observation concerns the depth layers beneath the visible structures. LIDAR has revealed overlapping phases of construction, with older foundations lying beneath newer terraces. This is important because it implies continuity rather than a single, isolated period of activity. Civilizations that build in layers tend to have administrative organization, generational planning, and a shared architectural logic. There is also the presence of subtle depressions near the central platforms that resemble storage pits or water basins. Their circular and semi-rectangular outlines align with the main structures, suggesting a functional relationship. If these depressions once held water, they might indicate a controlled hydrological system designed to buffer seasonal floods, a skill requiring sustained observation of environmental rhythms. A final observation comes from soil composition samples taken from deforested areas near similar formations. Early reports indicate the presence of charcoal, ceramics, and nutrient-rich sediments, all of which are typical markers of sustained human activity. While these findings are not yet directly linked to every newly mapped structure, their proximity strengthens the argument that the region supported more complex societal behavior than once assumed. Taken together, these observations form a pattern that is difficult to ignore. Each clue, though incomplete on its own, aligns with a broader framework of planning, engineering, and purposeful environmental modification. Some interpretations attempt to explain these formations through the simplest lens possible, applying what researchers often call the null hypothesis, that the patterns are the result of natural processes rather than human intervention. In this view, the rectangular platforms might be the product of erosion interacting with ancient riverbeds, where sediment layers harden differently and give the appearance of straight edges when viewed from above. It is a reasonable starting point, because scientific inquiry must first test whether ordinary mechanisms can account for unusual shapes. Another alternative model proposes that the structures belong not to a lost civilization, but to known pre-Columbian groups whose architectural footprint has simply been underestimated. According to this explanation, the apparent scale of the formations reflects repeated rebuilding rather than massive population centers. This theory fits with evidence of smaller settlements documented in previous decades, though it struggles to account for the size and geometric consistency revealed by recent scans. A third interpretation suggests that parts of the landscape may have been shaped by large-scale ecological engineering rather than urban design. In this scenario, the earthworks served agricultural purposes, raised fields, drainage platforms, and water retention structures designed to regulate the volatile Amazonian climate. Such techniques are known from other regions, and they demonstrate that sophisticated environmental manipulation does not always culminate in the formation of dense cities. However, this environmental engineering hypothesis becomes less convincing when considering the orthogonal layout of the pathways. Agricultural systems tend to follow terrain contours, whereas these pathways cut across them with directional intent. This symmetry hints at something beyond pure practicality. Some researchers also argue for a cultural mosaic rather than a unified civilization, a network of loosely connected groups sharing certain architectural practices. This model avoids the need for centralized governance and instead frames the region as a landscape shaped by many hands over long periods. It is appealing in its flexibility, yet it does not fully explain the repeated ratios and proportional relationships found across distant sites. The strongest challenge to the more dramatic interpretations lies in the persistence of uncertainty. No inscriptions, no clearly identifiable monuments, and no preserved artifacts have yet been firmly associated with the new formations. Without such direct cultural markers, any theory risks leaning too far forward. Still, the growing body of evidence gently shifts the balance. For now, The explanations that integrate both environmental engineering and deliberate architectural planning seem most compatible with the current data. But none of them can claim complete authority, and each leaves a margin of doubt that continues to shape the conversation. Despite the growing clarity of the scans, a wide expanse of uncertainty remains, stretching like an uncharted territory between what is observed and what can be confidently concluded. One of the most immediate gaps lies in the absence of material culture directly tied to the newly mapped formations. Without pottery, tools, inscriptions, or identifiable structural remnants, it is difficult to anchor the earthworks to a specific cultural lineage or historical period. What kind of society creates monumental geometry yet leaves so few durable traces behind? Another unresolved question concerns population scale. The dimensions of some platforms imply large, coordinated labor forces, but there is no definitive evidence for settlements of corresponding size. Were these ceremonial centers used sporadically by dispersed groups? Or do their proportions point to a hidden demographic reality that archaeological sampling has so far missed? The difference matters because it shapes how we interpret social complexity and regional connectivity. Environmental conditions add further ambiguity. The Amazon's humidity, dense vegetation, and acidic soils erase artifacts with unusual speed, meaning entire cultural traditions may have vanished long before researchers could identify them. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. Are we seeing only the most resilient architectural fingerprints, while everything else has been swallowed by time? If so, the absence of evidence may be less a clue and more a consequence of natural decay. Chronology is another puzzle. LIDAR can reveal shapes, but it cannot determine when they were built or how many construction phases unfolded over centuries. Core samples and deep excavations are needed to establish timelines, yet only a fraction of the sites has been explored on the ground. Until such work advances, every model remains suspended in provisional space. There is also a conceptual gap in understanding why such structures were built at all. Were they expressions of ritual identity, nodes in a regional exchange network, agricultural innovations designed to stabilize food supply? Or do they belong to a societal logic that no longer exists and is therefore difficult to reconstruct through analogy alone? These uncertainties do not weaken the mystery, they define it. The unanswered questions frame the boundaries of our current knowledge and signal how much remains hidden beneath the forest canopy. The questions raised at the beginning now return with greater depth, shaped by the evidence, the uncertainties, and the mechanisms that thread through this landscape. The idea that the formations are mere geological coincidences becomes increasingly difficult to support when confronted with the consistency of angles, the scale of platforms, and the repeated alignment of pathways. Natural processes can be powerful, but they rarely produce networks of right-angled corridors that stretch across kilometers. So what does this imply about the possibility of an unknown civilization in the Amazon? The evidence points toward a society capable of long-term planning, environmental engineering, and architectural coordination. The presence of layered construction phases, the proximity to terra preta soils, and the hydrological patterns surrounding the structures all suggest organized communal effort. These are not the hallmarks of isolated groups improvising on the landscape. They speak instead to sustained social design. Does this mean we are looking at a city large enough to rewrite established timelines of human development? Not necessarily, but the scale challenges the old assumption that dense, complex societies could not thrive in the rainforest. If these structures truly belong to an extended network of interconnected settlements, then the Amazon may have hosted forms of urban life that diverged from the traditional stone monument civilizations more frequently studied in the Old and New Worlds. The early fear expressed by some scientists stems not from superstition, but from the implications this carries. If an advanced cultural system flourished here, then a significant portion of South American prehistory remains unaccounted for. It would mean that our current models underestimate both the technological innovation and the ecological sophistication of ancient Amazonian peoples. Could the structures point to ceremonial or cosmological functions rather than daily urban life? Possibly, but such roles still require cultural complexity, shared belief systems, and coordinated labor. Even a ritual landscape of this magnitude would represent a level of social organization far beyond what earlier theories allowed. The initial questions therefore find a cautious but meaningful answer. Yes, the formations likely reflect human design, not geological accident. And yes, their scale and precision strongly hint at a cultural system far more complex than previously assumed. It is not yet clear whether this represents a single megalithic city in the traditional sense, but it mirrors many of the characteristics associated with early urban planning elsewhere in the world. What does all this ultimately mean? It means the Amazon was not a void of scattered tribes and fragile settlements. It was a canvas upon which some society, perhaps forgotten, perhaps only partially understood, inscribed patterns of life, belief, and engineering. And this realization alone forces us to expand the boundaries of what we consider possible in humanity's deep past. The wider meaning of this discovery reaches far beyond the boundaries of archaeology. It invites a reconsideration of how civilizations rise, adapt, and eventually vanish from sight. Human history is often told through stone monuments, carved inscriptions, and the remnants of durable architecture. But the Amazon suggests a quieter narrative, one in which complexity can flourish in fragile materials, leaving behind only subtle signatures that wait centuries to be revealed. It reminds us that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and that entire worlds can exist without leaving the familiar traces we expect. There is also something profoundly human in the way these structures interact with their environment. A society capable of engineering soil, regulating water, and shaping space with such precision must have understood the rhythms of its landscape intimately. Rather than conquering nature, they may have worked within it, producing a form of development that left little behind except the outlines of their intentions. This possibility challenges modern assumptions about progress, power, and the visibility of greatness. At a deeper level, the discovery touches on a universal tension. How many chapters of human history remain hidden because they do not fit the patterns we have learned to search for? How many cultures adapted so perfectly to their environments that they left behind only the faintest marks? And what does it say about our species that knowledge can rise to extraordinary heights and still dissolve into the forest floor, waiting to be rediscovered? The mystery in the Amazon is not a threat to our understanding. It is an invitation to humility. It encourages a broader definition of civilization, one that includes societies whose brilliance may not be measured in stone, but in the sophistication of their ecological harmony. It also reminds us that exploration is not a finished story. Vast regions of our world still hold secrets that challenge the boundaries of our imagination. In the end, this is more than a question of ancient engineering. It is a reminder that curiosity remains one of the strongest forces shaping our relationship with the past. To explore these hidden structures is to acknowledge that our knowledge is incomplete, and that discovery is a process that begins not with certainty, but with wonder. Thank you for watching, and if you want to follow more investigations into the mysteries of our world, consider subscribing to the channel.